Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. The Time of Awakening. Episode 4. Chapter 28 to 35. I caught up with Derek at the edge of a wooded patch beside the truck stop. I need to get in as deep as I can, he said. Follow my path. It's muddy. I could smell the rain, the damp chill of it lingering in the night air. Dead and decaying leaves slid underfoot. A dog barked somewhere. Derek paused, tracking the sound, then nodded, like it was far enough away, and continued walking. If I finish this, he began. If I seem even close to finishing, you need to take off. When I didn't answer, he said. Chloe. You aren't going to turn into some bloodthirsty monster, Derek. It'll still be you, just as a wolf. And you know that based on how much experience with werewolves. Okay, but you could be right. Dad said it would be like that, still me in wolf form, but after what those guys did? Playing with our genes? I have no idea what will happen. So you're getting out of here when the time comes, or you aren't sticking around at all. Okay. He glanced back at me, fevered eyes glowing. I mean it, Chloe. So do I. You're right. We don't know what will happen, and we can't take chances. As soon as you sprout fangs and a tail, I'll run screaming for the truck stop. You can skip the screaming part. We'll see. We walked until the floodlights from the parking lot barely pierced the trees. The moon was shrouded in cloud. Whether it was a full moon or a half moon, I didn't know. It didn't matter. A werewolf's changes had nothing to do with moon cycles. When it happened, whether the timing was convenient or not. Derek slowed, scratching his arm through his shirt. There's a log here, if you want to sit and wait. I'll get a little deeper in. I'm sure it's not the prettiest sight. I've seen it before. If it goes further, it'll be worse. I'm fine. When we entered a small clearing, Derek pulled off his sweatshirt. Under his t-shirt, his back muscles rippled, like snakes were trapped under his skin. Having seen this before, it didn't bother me, but it did remind me of something. On second thought, maybe I can't watch. Unless you brought a change of clothes, you really should get undressed this time. Right. Hold on. He disappeared into the brush. I turned around. A couple minutes later, the leaves crackled as he came out. I'm decent, he said. Got my shorts on. Nothing you haven't seen. My cheeks flamed at the memory, which was stupid, because seeing a guy in his boxers shouldn't be any different than seeing him in swim trunks. I'd even seen guys in their underwear, pranking at camp by running around our cabins, and I'd laughed and hooted with the other girls. But none of the guys at camp had looked like Derek. I turned slowly, hoping it was too dark for him to see me blushing. He wouldn't have noticed anyway. He was already on all fours, his head down, breathing in and out, like an athlete preparing for a run. I blamed the note Simon left, the image of the Terminator still lingering in my brain, but that's what Derek looked like, that scene where the Terminator first arrives, and he's crouched, naked. Not that Derek was totally naked or as pumped as Schwarzenegger, but he didn't look like a 16-year-old kid either, with a muscular back, bulging biceps, and that was enough of that. I looked away to scan the forest and took a few deep breaths of my own. Sit here. Derek pointed to a clear spot beside him where he'd laid out his sweatshirt. Thanks. I lowered myself onto it. If it gets too bad, go. I'll understand. I won't. He looked at the ground again, eyes closed as he inhaled and exhaled. His back spasmed and he winced, then stretched, his breathing deeper. That's a good idea. Stretch and work it out, I stopped. Okay, I'll shut up now. You don't need a coach. He gave a low rumble that it took me a moment to recognize as a laugh. Go ahead. Talk. If there's anything I can do, I know there probably isn't, but just be here. That I can manage. I realized his skin hadn't rippled in a while. And we might not even have to worry about it. It seems to be passing. False start, maybe. We should give it a few more minutes, then. His back shot up, body jackknifing as he let out a strangled cry. He managed 2 panting breaths before convulsing again. His arms and legs went rigid. His back arched to an unnatural height, spine jutting. His head dropped forward. His skin rippled and his back went even higher. A long whimper bubbled from his throat. His head flew up and, for a second, his eyes met mine, wild and rolling with pain and terror, even more than the first time because then, as scared as he'd been, he'd known this was natural, that his body would take him through it safely. Now, knowing about the mutations, he had no such guarantee. His fingers dug into the moist earth, the tips disappearing, the backs of his hands changing, tendons bulging, wrists thickening. He let out another cry, swallowing the end of it as he tried to keep quiet. I reached out and lay my hand on his. The muscles bulged and shifted. Coarse hair sprouted and pushed against my palm, then retreated. I rubbed his hand and moved closer and whispered it would be okay, he was doing fine. His back arched and he gulped air, and in that moment of silence, footsteps clomped along the path into the woods. Are you kids in there? It was the bus driver, his words harsh in the still forest, his figure backlit by the truck stoplights. Someone saw you kids head in here. You've got 1 minute to come out or the bus leaves. Go, Derek whispered, his voice guttural, barely recognizable. No. You should. I met his gaze. I'm not going. Now shhh. 10 seconds. The bus driver yelled. I'm not holding up the bus so you kids can screw around in the forest. If he comes closer, you go in there. I pointed at the thicket. I'll stop him. He won't. Sure enough, Derek barely got the words out before the figure began retreating. A few minutes later, the bus lights receded from the lot. That's okay, I said. I have money. We'll catch. Derek convulsed again. This time his head shot up and he spewed vomit into the bushes. Wave after wave of convulsions rocked him, each one emptying his stomach until vomit dripped from every branch and the sickly smell mingled with the sharper stink of his sweat. Hair sprouted and retracted and he kept convulsing and vomiting until there was nothing left to throw up, and still his stomach kept trying, with horrible dry heaves that were painful to hear. I rose onto my knees and rested my hand between his shoulder blades, rubbing and patting the sweat-slick skin there as I whispered the same words of reassurance, not even sure he could hear them anymore. His back muscles twisted and shifted under my hands, the knobs of his spine pressing against them, his skin soaked with sweat and covered with coarse dark hair that wasn't retracting, but growing longer. Finally Derek stopped heaving and shuddered, his whole body trembling from exhaustion, his head lowered almost to the ground. I rubbed his shoulder. It's okay, I said. You're doing great. You're almost there. He shook his head and made a sound that must have been no, but it was too guttural to be more than a growl. That's fine, I said. You will or you won't. You can't rush it. He nodded. His head was down, face averted, but I could still see the changes, his temples narrowing, hair shortening, the tops of his ears sticking out as they shifted higher onto his skull. I absently rubbed his back, then halted. "Do you want me to stop? Move away and give you more room." He shook his head as he struggled to catch his breath, sides and back heaving. I massaged the spot between his shoulders. His skin stopped moving and his spine retracted. His shoulders felt different, though. Set different, the muscles bunched and thick, almost hunched. The hair felt more like fur now, like my friend Kara's husky, with the coarse top layer, softer underneath. Derek said werewolves changed into actual wolves. I'd found that hard to believe. In fact, I'd heard that the reason the Wolfman type of werewolf had been so popular in early Hollywood was because of the difficulty of changing a human into a wolf. If they couldn't do it with makeup and prosthetics, surely the human body couldn't do it. But looking at Derek, shivering and gasping as he rested mid-change, I saw I'd been wrong. I still couldn't quite wrap even my vivid imagination around what I was seeing, but there was no doubt he was changing into a wolf. "It seems to have stopped again," I said. He nodded. "That's probably it, then. For now, this is as far as." His body went rigid. The muscles under my hand moved, but slowly, like they were settling, preparing to reverse the transformation. His back shot up, limbs straightening, head dropping, and there was this sound, an awful popping and snapping, like bones crackling. Then his head flew up and the crackling was drowned out by an inhuman howl. His head whipped from side to side and I saw his face then, the nose and jaw lengthening to a muzzle, neck thick, brow receding, black lips pulled back to show teeth sharpened to fangs. One eye caught mine, and the absolute terror in it chased mine away. I could not be afraid. I could not be freaked out. I could not make this worse for him in any way. So I met his gaze, unblinking, and kept rubbing his back. After a moment, the muscles under my hand relaxed and he went still, the silence broken only by labored heaves as he panted, the sound more canine than human. His back rose and fell with the deep breaths. Then another massive convulsion seized him, and I was sure that was the final jolt, that the transformation would finish. Instead, the fur between my fingers receded. He convulsed again, gagging, threads of bile dripping from his jaws. He shook them off, then turned his face away. Derek hacked and coughed for a minute, his limbs trembling. Then, slowly, they slid out from under him, like they couldn't bear his weight anymore, and he collapsed, panting and quivering, his fur a dark shadow of stubble, his body almost returned to a human shape, only the thickened neck and shoulders remaining. After one more deep, shuddering sigh, he rolled onto his side, toward me, legs drawn up, one hand draped over his face as it finished the reversal. I huddled there, trying to keep my teeth from chattering. Derek wrapped his hand around my bare ankle, where my sock had slid down into my sneaker. "You're freezing." I didn't feel cold. The shivering and goosebumps seemed more from nerves, but I said, "A little." He shifted, then took my knee and tugged me closer, sheltered from the bitter wind. The heat of his body was like a radiator and I stopped shivering. He wrapped his hand around my ankle again, his skin rough, like a dog's paw pads. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice still odd, strained and raspy, but understandable. I gave a small laugh. "I should be asking you that. Are you okay?" "Yeah. That must be what'll happen for a few times. A partial change, then back to normal. Practice runs." "I guess so." He moved his hand down under his eyes. "You didn't answer my question. Are you all right?" "I didn't do anything. Yet." You did. He looked at me. You did a lot. His eyes met mine, and I looked into them and I felt, I don't know what I felt. A strange nameless something I couldn't even identify as a good something or a bad something, could only feel in my gut, jumping and twitching, until I turned away and looked out over the forest. Yeah, we gotta go, he said, starting to rise. Not yet. Lie down. Rest. He sat up and swayed, as if lightheaded. Not fine. Okay. Just give me a section. He lay back down, eyelids bobbing as he fought to keep them open. Close your eyes, I said. Just for a minute. Him. I don't know if they were even fully closed before he fell asleep. 29. I huddled there until the sweat dried from his skin and he began to shiver, still sleeping. Then I unwrapped his fingers from my ankle. He let go, only to grasp my hand instead. I looked down at his hand, so huge around mine, like a kid's clutching a toy. I was glad I'd been here for him. Glad someone was. I don't think it would have mattered who. Even if there'd been nothing I could do, just having me there seemed to help. I couldn't imagine what he was going through, not just the agony but the uncertainty. Was this normal for young werewolves? Starting to change, then reversing? Or was it something the Edison group had done? What if he couldn't ever finish it? Would his body keep trying, putting him through this again and again? I knew he would already be worrying about the same thing. That didn't excuse his outbursts, but maybe it helped me understand him and not take it so personally when he lashed out at me. I slipped my hand from his, and he shifted with a grunt but didn't wake, just tucked his hand under his other arm and shivered. I hurried to where he'd left his clothing. When I returned, I checked the sweatshirt I'd been sitting on, but it was a damp, mud-caked mess. I decided to give him my jacket instead. It had to be close to his size, but it soon became apparent I wasn't getting any clothes on him. It didn't matter that they were baggy, all Derek's clothing was, like he thought he'd be less intimidating if he looked chubby instead of muscular. Still, I couldn't get his jeans past his knees, and even then I was sure I was going to wake him. So I settled for draping the clothing over him. I was fussing with the jacket, making sure it was the fleece side against him, when I caught a movement in the trees. I hunkered down beside Derek and went still. When I didn't hear anything, I peeked over Derek and saw a man through the trees. His face was rigid with anger as he walked fast. Something moved near the ground ahead of him. A truck stop visitor taking his dog for a walk? I glanced at Derek. If the dog smelled him, we were in trouble. I pushed up to a crouch and crept forward as quietly as I could. I saw a flicker of yellow fur through the thick bushes. The man waved his hand with a flash of silver, like he was holding a chain leash. He looked furious. I couldn't blame him. It was cold and wet and muddy, and his dog seemed to be insisting on doing its business in the deepest part of the small forest. When the man's foot flew out in a kick, though, my sympathy vanished, and I tensed, a shout of outrage on my lips. Then I saw it wasn't a dog in front of him. It was a girl with long blonde hair, wearing a light-colored shirt and jeans, crawling on all fours, like she was trying to get away from the man. He kicked her again and she twisted, scuttling forward awkwardly, like she was too badly hurt to get up and run. Her face turned my way and I saw she wasn't any older than me. Mascara raccoon ringed her eyes. Dirt streaked her face. Dirt and blood, I realized, the blood still dripping from her nose, staining her shirt. I sprang to my feet and as I did, the man raised his hand. Silver flashed, not a leash, but a knife. For a second, all I could see was that knife, my mind stumbling back to the girl in the alley, the knife tip over my eye. The terror I'd fought so hard to hide shot through me. The man grabbed the girl's long hair. He wrenched her head up, and that jolted me from my frozen terror. My mouth opened to call out, yell anything, just get his attention so she could escape. The knife sliced through the air, heading straight for the girl's throat, and I let out a cry. The knife passed through, seeming not to have left a mark, and I was sure he'd missed. Then her throat opened, splitting, gaping, blood gushing, spurting. I fell back, hands flying to my mouth to stifle another scream. He thrust the dying girl aside with a snarl of disgust. She collapsed to the ground, blood still spurting, mouth moving, eyes rolling wildly. The man turned toward me. I ran, tripping and stumbling through the undergrowth. I had to get to Derek, wake him, warn him. It seemed to take forever, but I finally made it. As I dropped beside him, I caught a glimmer out of the corner of my eyes, and I turned to see the man, back where I'd first seen him, in exactly the same position, heading the same way. His mouth opened, saying something, but no words came out. Why couldn't I hear him? The forest was so silent my panting breath sounded like a train, but I couldn't even hear the man's footsteps. I realized that the whole time I'd never heard a thing. I waited for the flash of silver I'd seen earlier, and it came, in exactly the same place. Then he kicked the girl, in the same spot. I reached into the pocket of my jacket, still wrapped around Derek, and pulled out the switchblade I'd taken from the girl in the alley. I was pretty sure by now that I wasn't in danger, but I wasn't taking chances. I crept toward the silent figures moving through the woods. The man kicked the girl a second time, but again the blow made no sound, her fall made no sound, she made no sound. Ghosts. Like the man in the factory. No, not ghosts. Ghosts might not make noise moving, but I could hear them talk. I could interact with them. These were just images. Metaphysical film clips of an event so horrible it was imprinted on this place, endlessly looping. The man grabbed the girl by her hair. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I still saw it, the memory imprinted on me now, replaying on my eyelids. I swallowed and retreated. Back in the clearing, I hunkered down beside Derek, drawing my knees up, my back turned to the scene playing out in the woods. But it didn't matter that I couldn't see it. I knew it was there, unfolding behind me, and it didn't matter if I hadn't really watched a girl die. In a way, I had. A girl my age had been murdered in these woods, and I'd seen her last terrified moments, watched her bleed to death in this forest. A life like mine had ended here, and it didn't matter how many times I'd seen deaths in movies, it wasn't the same, and I wasn't ever going to forget it. I huddled there, shivering, surrounded by darkness. I'd hated the dark since childhood. I know why now. I used to see ghosts in the dark when I was little, brushed off by my parents as bogeymen. Now, knowing that the bogeymen were real didn't help at all. Every whisper of wind sounded like a voice. Every animal rustling in the forest was a poor creature I'd raised from the dead. Every creak of a tree was a corpse clawing up from the cold ground. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the dead girl. Then I saw the dead bats. Then I saw the girl, buried in this forest, never found, waking in a shallow grave, trapped in her rotted corpse, unable to scream, to struggle. I kept my eyes open. I thought of waking Derek. He wouldn't complain. But after what he'd just been through, it seemed silly to say I couldn't bear being out here with a murder reenactment playing behind me. I did nudge him a few times, though, hoping he'd wake up. But he didn't. He was exhausted and he needed his rest, and even if he did wake up, what could we do? We were trapped at this bus stop until morning. So I sat and I tried not to think. When that failed, I recited multiplication tables, which only reminded me of school and made me wonder whether I'd ever go back, and that reminded me of Liz, of how much she'd hated math, and I wondered how she was and where she was and I switched to reciting favorite movie dialogue, but, again, it only reminded me of my other life, then my dad and how worried he must be. I drove myself nuts trying to figure out some safe way to get him a message, getting more and more frustrated when I couldn't. I finally settled on something that always comforted me, singing Daydream Believer. It was my mom's favorite song, the one she'd sung me to sleep with whenever I had nightmares. I only knew one verse and the chorus, but I whispered them under my breath, over and over and Chloe. Fingers touched my shoulder. I blinked and saw Derek crouched beside me, still in his shorts, his face dark with worry. Sorry. I drifted off. With your eyes open? Sitting up? I've been trying to snap you out of it for a while. Oh. I looked around and saw it was day. I blinked harder and yawned. Long night. You've been sitting here awake all night? He lowered himself to the ground. Because of what happened with me? I know that couldn't have been easy to watch. That's not why. I tried to duck having to explain, but he kept pushing, and it came down to telling the truth or letting him think that watching him change had put me in a state of shock. I told him about the girl. It wasn't real, I said as I finished. Well, it was once. But I was just seeing some kind of ghostly replay. And you watched that, all night? No, I waved my hand over my shoulder back there. I didn't look. Why didn't you wake me up? You were tired. I didn't want to bother you. Bother me? That is the stupidest. He stopped. Wrong word. Stubborn, not stupid, and yelling at you right now isn't helping, is it? Not really. Next time, wake me up. I don't expect you to tough out something like that, and I'm not impressed that you did. Yes, sir. And next time you don't tell me, I will yell at you. Yes, sir. I'm not your drill sergeant, Chloe. I don't like getting on your case all the time. I wasn't touching that one. I don't mean to, he sighed, shook his head, and got to his feet. Give me a minute to get dressed, and we'll head into the truck stop, warm up, and get some breakfast. He took his clothes and headed for the thicket, still talking. The main bus station is in the city. I'm hoping we'll have enough for cab fare. When we get inside, we'll call and get the bus rates and schedule, so we'll know how much money we have left over. I pulled bills from my pocket 80. I left the rest in my backpack. I don't like carrying it all around. Most of mine is in my backpack, too, which I forgot on the bus. He cursed himself under his breath. You were in no shape to be remembering anything last night. I should have thought to grab mine. But you were worried about me. Never mind, we'll have enough. I've got about 100. A pause. Then the sound of hands slapping fabric, like he was patting his pockets. He swore. It must have fallen out. Where did you get my jeans from? Right where you left them, folded by the tree. I checked the pockets first. There was just an energy bar wrapper. I know I had. He stopped and swore again. No, I moved the money to my jacket, which I left on the bus. $80 should cover the bus to New York and breakfast. We'll walk, then catch a city bus to the station. He strode from the bushes, muttering, "Stupid, stupid. Like I said, you had other things on your mind." We both did. And neither of us is used to playing fugitive yet. We'll learn. For now, let's get inside. I'm freezing. 30. While Derek was in the bathroom, I called the bus station and got fares and a schedule. The guy was even nice enough to tell me which city buses we needed to take to get there. When Derek came out of the bathroom, his sweatshirt was damp and clean, and his hair was wet and glistening, like he'd wiped down the shirt and washed his hair in the sink. Good news first or bad? I stopped. Dumb question. Bad, right? Yeah. We've got a 2-mile walk to the nearest bus stop, plus 1 transfer to get to the terminal. The good news? The fare is $60 for 2 students to New York, so we have enough for breakfast. And deodorant. I was going to say that didn't matter, but from the set of his jaw, it mattered to him, so I nodded and said, sure. We bought deodorant and a cheap comb. And, yes, we shared them. Money was too tight to get silly about that. The smell of bacon and eggs from the restaurant set my mouth watering, but our cash wouldn't stretch to cover a hot breakfast. We grabbed cartons of chocolate milk, 2 energy bars, and 2 bags of peanuts, then headed out for our hike to the bus stop. After about a half-mile of silence, Derek said, "You're quiet this morning." "Just tired." "Another 100 feet." "It's last night, isn't it?" he said. "If you want to talk about it." "Not really." Every few steps, he'd glance my way. I wasn't in the mood to share, but my silence was obviously bugging him, so I said, "I keep thinking about when I first saw that girl in trouble. When I thought it was real. I was going to do something." "What?" he cut in. I shrugged. "Yell. Distract him. If it was real, you shouldn't have even thought of getting involved." The guy had a knife. He was obviously ready to use it. "That wasn't really the point," I murmured, watching my toe kick a pebble along the roadside. "Okay. So the point was..." I saw that knife and I froze. All I could think about was that girl in the alley, the one who held a knife on me. If last night had been real, I might have let someone die because I was too freaked out to do anything. But it wasn't real. I looked up at him. "Okay," he said. "Again, that wasn't your point. But what happened in that alley? You still hadn't had time to slow down and..." he gestured, searching for a word. "Process it. You talked to Simon about it, right?" I shook my head. He frowned. "But you did tell him what happened." Another head shake. "You should. You need to talk to someone. You sure can't talk to Tori. Liz is probably a good listener, but she's not around." He paused. "You could talk to me, but you've probably figured out I'm not good with stuff like that." "I mean, if you wanted to," he trailed off, then came back firmer, shoulders hunching against the morning chill. "It should be Simon. He'd want to know what happened, and he'd want you to be the one to tell him." I nodded, though I didn't know whether I would. Simon had spent enough time lately on Chloe comfort duty. I needed to start working stuff out by myself. But there was a related issue I did want help with. "I've been thinking," I began. "After what happened, I should learn how to defend myself. Some basic self-defense moves." "That's a good idea." "Great, so could you." "I'll ask Simon to teach you some," he continued. "Oh. I guess I thought that would be more your area." "Our dad taught us both. Simon's good. Unless..." he glanced down at me. "I mean, if you want, sure, I can help out. But Simon would be a better teacher. He's got the patience for it." "Right. I'll talk to Simon then." He nodded and we lapsed into silence again. We reached the bus station with 20 minutes to spare. Derek had me hang back, where the agent could see I was a teenager without getting too close a look, in case my photo was circulating. He went up to the counter alone. When he seemed to be having trouble, though, I joined him. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "She won't give us the youth fare." "It's not a youth fare," the woman said. "It's a student fare. If you can't produce ID, you don't get it." "But we got tickets in Buffalo without any ID." I put my used ticket on the counter. "That's Buffalo," she said with a sniff. "Here in the state's capital we follow the rules. No ID, no student fare." "Okay, adult tickets, then." "We don't have enough," Derek murmured. "What? It's 38 each for adults. We're $6 short." I leaned into the wicket. "Please, it's really important. You can see on our ticket there that we already bought fares to New York, but my friend got sick and we had to get off the bus." "Doesn't matter. How about one adult and one youth?" "We have enough." "Next," she called, and waved up the man behind us. The bus station also serviced Greyhound, but their sign clearly stated that their student fares required a special card, which was why we hadn't bought from them in Buffalo. I tried anyway. The woman there was more sympathetic, but she explained that she couldn't issue the reduced fare tickets without entering a student discount card number into the computer. So we were out of luck. "We'll figure something out," I said as we moved away from the Greyhound counter. "You go. I'll give you directions to Andrew's house. He can pick me up here." "What if he's not there?" "He could have moved or could be away. Then I'd have to find Simon, use a good chunk of money for us all to come back and get you." Derek nodded, conceding my point. "You lived around here for a while." I raised my hands. "I know, it's not your favorite place to remember, but is there anyone you could borrow $10 from?" "A friend?" "Well, sure, maybe." A small laugh. "Yeah, you sound as doubtful about that as you should. You may have guessed I don't go out of my way to make friends." "I don't see the point, especially when I'm never in one place long. I've got my dad and Simon. That's enough." "His pack." He continued, "I suppose I could find someone. Simon's bound to have a friend or teammate who owed him money. He's bad for stuff like that, lends it and never asks for it back. On second thought, considering you vanished under bad circumstances, reappearing now might not be the wisest idea. The last thing we need is someone calling the cops." I walked to the stand of brochures and took one listing fares and schedules. Then I went to the map of New York State and studied the two. Derek read over my shoulder. "There," he said, pointing to a town on the map. "We can afford the full fare to New York from there. As for how we'll get there, that was the question." 31. Our best shot of getting where we wanted to go was by hitchhiking. We weren't stupid enough to thumb a ride, but we might be able to sneak one. So we decided to go back to the truck stop. I dozed for a few minutes while we rode the city bus, then we started the long walk. We were about halfway there when Derek said, gruffly, "I'm sorry." "About what?" "This. You helped me last night after all the crap I put you through. And this is your reward. Stranded in Albany. It's an adventure. I can't remember the last time I took a city bus. I'm getting my exercise, too. After a week cooped up in Lyle House and that laboratory, I've never been more in the mood for a long walk." We walked a while longer. "I know you're tired," he said. "And hungry." "Tired, yes. Hungry, a bit. No. I looked up at him. Seriously? I'm not. You've been really quiet. I laughed. I'm normally really quiet. But these last couple of weeks have not been normal. I know you don't always say a lot, you've just been, he shrugged. I thought you were mad. He shoved his hands into his pockets. About that being mad. You were right the other night, after what happened in that alley. I was mad at myself. It just took me a while to calm down enough to figure that out. I nodded. What I did, when we lived here, hurting that kid. I didn't think it could ever happen again. I've been through it so many times, thinking of what went wrong and what I'd do if I ever got into that situation again, all the coping strategies Dr. Gill taught me. Dr. Gill? Yeah, I know. She creeped me out even before we knew about the Edison group. But she was a real shrink, and she did try to help. It was in their best interests to teach me to control my temper. So I was sure, if anything like that ever happened again, there was no question that I'd handle it better. And what happened? Almost the exact same scenario, and I did the exact same thing. You stopped yourself before you threw her into the wall. No, you stopped me. If you hadn't yelled, I would have done it. All those strategies. All that mental rehearsal. And when it happened, I never considered doing anything different. I couldn't. My brain just shut down. But it didn't take much to turn it back on again. He shrugged. That's got to be progress, right? I suppose so, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. At the truck stop, our plan was to stow away in a transport. We sat in the restaurant, nursing sodas while Derek listened to the conversations around us, and picked out truckers heading our way. The first truck was parked up front, making it impossible to sneak on without being seen. The second time, the trailer had a huge padlock on it, too big for Derek to break. The third time, as the saying goes, was the charm. We'd followed the driver to his vehicle, which turned out to be a cube van. After he got into the cab, we snuck in the back. The guy ran some kind of construction business. The van smelled of wood chips and oil and was full of tools, ropes, ladders, and tarps. When the truck reached the highway and the road noise was loud enough to drown us out, Derek took the tarps and made a bed on the floor. You need sleep, he said. They stink but they're softer than cardboard. Thanks. He handed me half an energy bar that he must have been saving. No, keep it, I said. You'll sleep better if your stomach isn't growling. And don't say it isn't. I can hear it. I accepted the bar. And take this. He stripped off his sweatshirt. Again, it might not smell great, but it's warm. You need. I don't. I've still got a touch of fever from last night. I took the sweatshirt. It's okay, Derek. I'm not mad. I know. I settled onto the tarp bed and pulled the sweatshirt over me, like a blanket. Then I ate the rest of the energy bar. When I finished, Derek said, "You can't sleep with your eyes open, Chloe. I don't want to drift off, in case anything happens. I'm here. Go to sleep." I closed my eyes. I woke when the truck slowed. Derek was at the back, opening the door to peek out. "Is this our stop?" I asked. "We should be far enough. We aren't in a town, though. It's another truck stop. A pee break after that mega coffee he bought." "Yeah." He opened the door farther for a better look. "I'd rather be in a town. But he might not stop at one. We should get out while we can." Derek nodded and closed the door. The truck pulled into a spot and stopped. "Get under a tarp," Derek whispered, in case he checks the back. A minute later, the rear door squealed open. I held my breath. The cube van wasn't that big, and if the driver climbed inside to get something, he'd probably step on us. But he stayed at the tailgate. Tools clattered, like he was getting one from a box. Then the noise stopped. I tensed. "I did forget the new vice grips," the man muttered. "Great." The door shut with a bang. When I started pulling off the tarp, Derek whispered, "Wait." He's still walking away. A minute passed as he listened, then he said, "Okay." I got up and pushed the tarps back where we'd found them as Derek peeked outside again. "Trees to our left," he said. "We'll head through there, then circle and grab something to drink from the restaurant before we head out. And use the bathroom." "Yeah. Follow me." We slipped out of the van and darted to the trees. Running behind Derek was worse than running behind Tori with his long legs. He barely needed to walk fast before the gap between us widened. When he stopped short and spun to face me, I expected a scowl and an order to keep up, but his lips formed a curse. Running footfalls sounded behind me. I was about to break into a sprint when a hand clamped down on my shoulder. Derek started to charge. I saw his expression, that telltale curl of his lip, and I wildly gestured for him to stop. He did, skidding to a halt, but his gaze stayed fixed over my head, watching my captor. "I thought I'd picked up a passenger or two," said a man's voice. He turned me around. It was the driver of the van. He was middle-aged with a grey ponytail and a craggy face. "We didn't take anything," I said. "I'm sorry. We just needed a ride." "Jesus," he said, shifting me into the sun for a better look. "How old are you?" "15. Just barely, I'll bet." He shook his head. "Running away from home?" "I'd bet on that, too." His voice softened. "That's not a road you want to take, kids. Speaking from experience, it is not the road at all." Derek sidled closer, gaze fixed on the man, so intent I don't think he heard a word the guy said. I slid my hand into my pocket, fingertips touching my knife, not taking it out, just reminding myself it was there, that I wasn't as helpless as I felt. I caught Derek's attention, not sure he'd notice, but he did, nodding absently, letting me know he was still in control. The man continued, "Whatever is going on at home, it's not as bad as you think." I lifted my gaze to his. "And if it is?" A pause, then a slow, sad nod. "All right. Maybe that's so. It happens, more than you think, but there are other ways to deal with it. Places you can go. People who can help." "We're fine," Derek said, his voice a low rumble. The man shook his head. "You're not fine, son. You're, what, 17? On the run? Catching rides in the back of vans." "We're fine." Derek's rumble had gone lower, a growl now. He cleared his throat and eased back. "We appreciate your concern, sir." "Do you, son? Do you really?" He shook his head. "I'm going to take you both inside and get you a hot meal. Then I'll make some calls. Find you a place to stay." "We can't," I began. "No one's going to send you home. Now come on." His hand tightened on my shoulder. Derek stepped forward. "Sorry, sir, but we can't do that." "Yes, you can." Derek waved for me to come over to him. I took a step. The man's hand tightened more. "Let her go." The growl had returned to Derek's voice. No, son. I won't hurt your friend, but I'm going to take her inside and call someone who can help. I'm hoping you'll come with us, but that's your choice. Go, I whispered, low enough that only Derek could hear. I'll catch up. I was sure he'd heard, but he pretended not to. I'm going to ask you again, sir. Let her go. That sounds an awful lot like a threat, son. You're a big boy, but you don't want to take on a guy who's been in construction for 20 years and in more fights than he cares to admit to. I don't want to hurt you. Derek sprang, lightning fast. He had his arm around the man's throat before the guy even got his fists up. As he yanked the man down in a headlock, I stumbled out of the way, my hand flying from my pocket, knife sailing to the ground. The man stared at it. I scooped it up and put it back in my pocket. We don't want to hurt you either, Derek said. But you can see he tightened his grip until the man's eyes bugged that I could. I know you're trying to help us, but you don't understand the situation. Derek looked at me. Run back to the van. Grab rope and some rags. I took off. 32. 20 minutes later, we were a mile from the truck stop, trudging through a field. Ahead was a road that ran alongside the highway. You don't think we did the right thing, Derek said. I shrugged. I didn't tie him too tight. He'll get out in an hour, probably less, and I left his cell phone right there, in case there's any problem. I nodded. We walked another 50 feet. What would you have done? He asked. You know my plan. It's the one you pretended not to hear. We reached the roadside before he answered. Yeah, okay. I heard. But it didn't look to me like he was going to give you a chance to escape. I knew I could take him down safely, without hurting him, before things got worse. And if I can do that, then that's the choice I'm going to make. It's how our dad taught us to handle situations like that. I considered it, then nodded. You're right. He looked surprised. I don't have experience with this stuff, these kinds of decisions, I said. With the girl in the alley or the Edison group, the answer was easy. If someone's trying to hurt us, we have every right to strike back. It's just that guy was trying to help a couple of runaways. He didn't deserve to end up bound and gagged. I nodded. Even someone like that is a threat, Chloe. Whether he means to be or not. We had to get away or his help would have landed us back with the Edison group. I know. We moved to the side of the road for a passing car, tensing as it went by, making sure the brake lights didn't flash, the car didn't slow. It wouldn't matter if the driver was a psycho trying to abduct us or a grandmother offering us a lift. We had to react the same way. Run. And if we couldn't run, fight. The car continued, speed unchecked. We can't trust anyone now, I murmured, even the good guys. Yeah. Sucks, doesn't it? It did. We continued down back roads running roughly parallel to the highway. Judging by how long we'd been in the van, Derek figured we had to be close to the next town with a bus stop, but the truth was that we had no idea. However far it was, we had to walk it. We weren't about to hitch another ride. One problem with our quiet country stroll was the dogs. Those tied up launched into a barking frenzy when they caught a whiff of Derek. No one seemed concerned, though out here, I guess there were so few passers-by that dogs did tend to bark at them, and owners ignored it. However, being in the country also meant that a lot of those dogs weren't chained. More than one came charging down a driveway. Eventually, our reaction became automatic. At the first note of a bark, we'd stop walking. I'd move behind Derek. He'd stand his ground and wait. Once the dog got within eye contact range, it would take one good look at Derek and run, yelping, for safety. Do they always back down like that? I asked as we watched a yellow lab race back home, tail between its legs. Depends on the dog. Big country dogs like these? Yeah. It's the fancy city ones that give me trouble. Overbred, Dad says. Makes them skittish and screws up their wiring. I had a Chihuahua attack me last year. He showed me a faint scar on his hand. Took a good chunk out. I sputtered a laugh. A Chihuahua? Hey, that thing was more vicious than a pit bull. I was at a park with Simon, kicking around a ball. All of a sudden, this little rat dog comes tearing out of nowhere, jumps up, and clamps down on my hand. Wouldn't let go. I'm shaking it, and the owner's yelling at me not to hurt little Tito. I finally get the dog off. I'm bleeding all over the place and the guy never even apologizes. He didn't think it was strange? His dog attacking you like that? Nah. He said the soccer ball must have provoked it, and we needed to be more careful. When strange stuff happens, people come up with their own explanations. I told him about the girl in the alley, accusing Tori of tasering her. Yeah, he said. We have to be careful, but they'll usually explain it away themselves. We moved aside as a pickup passed, the driver lifting a hand in greeting. I waved back, then watched until I was sure he wasn't going to stop. So do all animals react that way to you? I know you said rats steer clear. Most do. They see a human, but they smell something else. It confuses them. Canines are the worst, though. He paused. No, cats are the worst. I really don't like cats. I laughed. As the shadows lengthened, Derek moved us across the road to the sunny side. I went to the zoo once, he continued. 5th grade field trip. Dad said I couldn't because of the werewolf thing. Back then, I didn't freak animals out. I just made them nervous. So I decided Dad was being unfair and went anyway. How? Forged his name and saved my allowance. So what happened? Pretty much what Dad figured. I made the predators nervous and totally freaked out the prey animals. My classmates thought it was cool, though. They got to see an elephant charge. Seriously? Yeah. I felt bad. So I stayed back from the pens after that. They weren't what I wanted to see anyway. Which was? Wait. The wolves, right? He nodded. You wanted to see if they'd recognize you as one of them. Nah. Nothing silly like that. He walked in silence for a moment. Okay. Exactly like that. I had this, he struggled for a word. Fantasy. A glower said that wasn't the word he'd have chosen. This idea that they'd smell me and, he shrugged. I don't know what. Just that they'd do something. That something cool would happen. Did it? Sure, if you consider it cool to watch a wolf batter itself against the fence. Oh. It was, his gaze went distant, staring off down the road, expression unreadable. Bad. I got out of there as fast as I could, but he didn't stop. The next day a kid at school said they put the wolf to sleep. I looked up at Derek. He continued, gaze still fixed on the road. I went home and grabbed the paper. The city section was missing. Dad had gotten to it first. He'd figured out what had happened, but he wasn't going to say anything. He knew I'd been upset about something that night, and I guess he thought that was punishment enough. So I went to the store and bought a paper myself. It was true. I nodded, not sure what to say. Sudden, unprovoked aggression toward humans, he recited, as if he'd never forgotten the words. Wolves don't normally act like that. All those stories about the big, bad wolf are crap. Yeah, they're predators, and they're dangerous. But they don't want to have anything to do with humans if they can avoid it. The only time they do is if they're sick, starving, or defending their territory. I was a lone wolf invading a pack's turf. He was the alpha. It was his duty to protect his pack. And he got killed for it. You didn't mean for that to happen. That's no excuse. Dad taught me about wolves. I knew how they behaved. I'd seen it with the other boys, the other subjects. Do you remember them? Simon wasn't sure you did. Yeah. I do. He rubbed the back of his neck as he walked, then looked at me. You getting tired? A little. It shouldn't be far now. So, he seemed to be searching for something to say. I hoped it was more about himself or about the other werewolves, but when he finally spoke, he said, that special school you go to. You take theater. I'm in the theater arts stream. We still take all the regular classes, like math, English, science. And so we shifted to simpler subjects for the rest of the walk. 33. We reached the next town and found the bus stop a flower shop, actually, with tickets sold at the till. We tried again for youth prices and, as in Buffalo, got them without question. Figures. That meant we had extra cash and a little more than 2 hours before departure. As for what we'd do with that time and money? Our grumbling stomachs answered that question. It was getting dark now, still early evening though, so no one paid any attention to a couple of teens walking around. We went a few blocks looking for a place that sold hot, cheap food. Derek's nose led us to a fast food Chinese restaurant. A popular destination, unfortunately, with a huge line. I saved us a table while he went up to the counter. The line barely seemed to be moving, and the restaurant was stifling hot. Before long, my eyelids were flagging. Tired, dear. I straightened to see an elderly woman in a yellow coat standing beside my table. She smiled at me. I returned it. Mind if I sit for a moment? She waved at the empty chair across from me. My gaze shot to Derek, still 5 people from the front of the line. I'll leave when your young man comes back, she said. It's terribly busy in here, isn't it? I nodded and waved for her to take the seat. She did. I have a great-granddaughter your age, she said. About 14, I'm guessing. That's right, I said, hoping I didn't sound too nervous. I shouldn't be answering questions, even incorrectly, but I didn't know what else to do. I glanced at Derek, hoping for rescue, but he was studying the menu board. 9th grade. Yes. And what's your favorite subject, dear? Drama. She laughed. I haven't heard that one. Is it like acting? I explained, and as we talked, I relaxed. Once we got beyond age and grade, she didn't ask anything too personal, not even my name. She was just an old lady who wanted to talk, which was nice for a change. We chatted until Derek was second in line. Then laughter erupted at a table behind me. I turned to see 2 couples, a year or 2 older than me. The girls were sneering in disgust. One guy was red-faced with stifled laughter. The other wasn't bothering to hold his in, laughing so hard he was doubled over. All 4 were looking at me. The entire restaurant was looking at me. It was like a nightmare where kids are laughing at you, and you keep walking through the halls, not knowing why until you realize you aren't wearing any pants. I knew I was wearing pants. The only thing I could think of was my black hair. It wasn't that bad, was it? Oh, dear, whispered the old woman. What's wrong? What did I do? She leaned over, her eyes glistening. Tears? Why would she be? I'm sorry, she said. She gave a sad twist of a smile. I only wanted to speak to you. You seemed like such a nice girl. I caught a glimpse of Derek, out of line now, striding over, glowering at the snickering boys. The woman got to her feet and leaned across the table again. It was very nice talking to you, dear. She put her hand on mine, and it passed through. I leaped to my feet. I'm sorry, she said again. The look on her face was so sad that I wanted to say it was okay, it was my fault. But before I could get a word out, she faded away, and then all I could hear was the laughter around me, the mutters of crazy and schizo, and I stood there, rooted to the floor, until Derek took my arm, his grip so soft I could barely feel it. Come on, he said. Yeah, the laughing guy called. I think your girlfriend's day pass has expired. Derek slowly raised his head, lip curling in that too familiar look. I grabbed his arm. He blinked and nodded. As we turned to go, the other guy at the table chimed in. Trolling for chicks at the psych ward. He shook his head. Now that's desperate. As we passed the front window, I swore every eye inside followed us. I caught a few looks, sympathy, pity, distaste, disgust. Derek moved between me and the window, blocking my view as we walked. They didn't need to do that, he said. Those kids, sure. They're IDTS. But the grown UPS should know better. What if you were mentally ill? He led me around to the parking lot, then stopped at the back, under the shadow of the building overhang. You'll never see them again, he said. And if they'd treat a real mentally ill person like that, then you shouldn't care what they think. Bunch of morons. I said nothing, just stared out at the parking lot, shivering. He shifted in front of me, trying to block the wind. We should go, I said. You need to eat. I'm sorry. For what? Talking to yourself? So what? People do it all the time. They should have ignored it. Would you? Sure. None of my business. I wouldn't laugh or stare. I know. But you couldn't ignore it. Maybe you'd pretend not to notice, but you'd still think about it, about the person doing it, what was wrong with her, whether she was going to freak out and pull a gun or. I wrapped my arms around myself. I'm babbling. But you know what I mean. I was sitting in a restaurant, carrying on a conversation with someone and I never even guessed she was a ghost. You'll figure it out. How? They look like people. They sound like people. Unless they walk through the furniture, there's no clue. Do I have to stop talking to strangers? Ignore every person who walks up to me? That'll look normal. I gave my head a sharp shake. Babbling again. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry you got caught up in that. You think I care? He put one hand on the wall and leaned down to me. You'll work it out. Other necromancers do. You just need to figure out the tricks of the trade. Before I get locked up. Much more of this on the run stuff, and you might be going into restaurants, talking to yourself on purpose, trying to get locked up someplace with a bed and a hot shower. I managed a smile. Right now, I'd settle for hot food. How about hot chocolate? What? On the way here I saw one of those fancy coffee places, some Starbucks knockoff. Big armchairs, a fireplace, didn't look too busy. This isn't exactly a $5 coffee town. I pictured curling up in a chair, in front of a fire, sipping a huge, steaming hot chocolate. I smiled. It's settled then, he said. We'll get brownies or cookies to eat. A real nutritious dinner. Now I think it was this way. We set out. The coffee shop had been on the street with the bus stop. We tried to get there and out of the freezing cold as quickly as possible. After cutting through a couple of parking lots, we saw our next potential shortcut, a playground. When I started to cross the street, Derek stopped me. That's not always the kind of place you want to be at night. He was right, of course. It looked innocent enough, a narrow strip of park with a line of swings and slides, a big plastic play center at the end, but between the equipment and the trees were a lot of shadows. After dark, when the kiddies had gone home, it made the perfect place for bigger, more dangerous kids to hang out. Derek scanned the park as he sampled the breeze. Empty, he said finally. Let's go. We jogged across the road. Out in the open now, the wind got even worse, swirling around us, bitter cold. The swings twisted and creaked. As we passed, a sudden gust sent one slamming into my shoulder. I stumbled back with a yelp and caught a mouthful of sand, whirling up from the ground. As I sputtered, Derek's head shot up. I spit out the sand and turned to him. He'd gone still, face lifted. What do you smell? I asked. I'm not sure, I thought. The wind changed and his nostrils flared. His eyes went wide. Run! He gave me a shove and I broke into a sprint. In the last few days, I'd done this running from danger stuff often enough that my brain kicked my legs into high gear automatically, my aching feet forgotten. Derek stayed behind me, footsteps pounding. Chloe, he yelled as a figure stepped into my path. Derek grabbed me by my shoulders, my feet flying off the ground before I'd even stopped running. He backed us up against the plastic play set. A man was sauntering our way. Another walked from the other direction. 2 escape routes, both blocked. Derek glanced up at the play set, but we were against a solid wall of plastic, a crow's nest 10 feet overhead. There was a fireman's pole 10 feet away, but that wouldn't take us anywhere useful. The men looked like they were in their 20s. One was tall and lean with blonde hair to his collar. He wore a plaid jacket and boots, and looked like he hadn't bothered with a razor in days. His companion was shorter and beefier, swarthy with dark hair. He wore a leather jacket and sneakers. Neither looked like the kind of guy you'd expect to hang out in a park, hassling kids for cigarettes and pocket money. Hanging out at the monster truck races, maybe, hassling girls for their names and phone numbers. They didn't seem drunk either. They were walking straight and their eyes looked clear, glittering in the dark like. I shrank back. Derek's hands tightened on my shoulders and he leaned down, whispering, "Werewolves." 34. Teehee, 2 werewolves stopped a few yards away from us. "We're just passing through," Derek said, voice steady. "If this is your territory." The blonde one cut him off with a laugh. "Our territory? Did you hear that, Ramon? He's asking if this is our territory. I know you're werewolves and I know." "Werewolves?" Ramon drawled. "Did he say werewolves?" The blonde lifted a finger to his lips in an exaggerated shhh, and jerked his head at me. "She knows," Derek said. "Tisk tisk. That's against the rules, pup. You don't go telling your girlfriends what you are, even the cute ones." Didn't your daddy teach you better than that? Who is your daddy, by the way? Derek said nothing. He's a cane, Ramon said. Think so? The blonde squinted, his head tilting. Guess he could be. If you'd met more than one, Liam, you wouldn't be questioning. That, he pointed at Derek, is a cane. 3 things every cane has in common. Big as a house. Ugly as a mud fence. Dumb as a brick. Then he's not, I began before Derek shushed me. Liam stepped closer. Did you say something, cutie? We're just passing through, Derek said. If this is your territory, then I apologize. Hear that, Ramon? He apologizes. Liam took another step closer. You have no idea whose territory you're on, do you? No, I don't know you. If I should, then. This is Pack territory. Derek shook his head. No, the Pack is in Syracuse. You think they claim one city? Ramon said. Their territory is New York State. You do know what the Pack does to trespassers, don't you, pup? Liam said. Your daddy must have shown you the pictures. Derek said nothing. The pictures? Liam pressed. Of the last guy who trespassed on Pack territory. Still Derek said nothing. Your daddy didn't like you much, did he? 'Cause if he did, he would have shown you those pictures, so you didn't make the mistake you're making right now. The last time a mutt got too close to Pack turf, they carved him up with a chainsaw. Then they took photos, and they passed them out as a warning to the rest of us. My stomach lurched. I squeezed my eyes shut until the image passed. They were just making this up to scare us, and it was working, at least on me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Derek squeezed my shoulder, his thumb rubbing, telling me to stay calm. No, I haven't seen them. But thanks for the warning. I'll. Who is your daddy? Ramon asked. Zachary Kane? You're darker, but you've got his look. You're about the right age, too. And that might explain why he didn't raise you right. Him being dead and all, Liam said. But if it was Zach, then you should know to keep off Pack territory. Should I? Derek said, his voice emotionless. Don't you know how your daddy died? Dumbass decided to join an uprising against the Pack, got himself caught. Tortured to death, right up there in Syracuse. He looked at Ramon. Think they used the chainsaw? Derek cut in, if the Pack's so bad, why are you on their territory? Maybe we're Pack. Then you wouldn't be talking like you were, saying their territory, what they do. Liam laughed. Check this out. A cane with brains. Must come from your mama. Do you want to know why we're here? Ramon said. A mission of mercy, and we're the ones praying for mercy. See, we hooked up with this kid from down under last year. We quickly found out why he'd left home. Man-eater, Liam said. Man-eater. I didn't mean to say it aloud, but it slipped out. It's a disgusting habit. Now hunting humans? Killing them. He smiled. That's always good sport. But eating? Not my style. Well, unless you count that time in Mexico. Derek cut him off. So if you're allowed on Pack territory, I'm sure they won't bother me. I'm not causing trouble. Can I finish my story? Ramon said. So this Aussie, he's not very discreet about his bad habit. The Pack catches wind of it. Next thing you know, all 3 of us are on their hit list. The Aussie dude goes to ground, Liam said, leaving me and Ramon holding the bag. The pack doesn't care if we're man-eaters or not. We've had some run-ins with them before, so, as far as they're concerned, we've used up our free swings. Batter out. They already caught up with Ramon once. Luckily, he got away. Or most of him. Ramon pulled up his shirt. His side was pitted and puckered with healing scar tissue, the kind of thing I'd only seen in SFX demonstrations. So now you're heading up to Syracuse to talk to the pack, I said. Set them straight. That's right. Or that was the plan. But it's Russian roulette, see? We throw ourselves at their mercy, and we might never stand up again. Then we caught an amazing break. He looked at Ramon, who nodded. For a moment, neither said a word. Liam stood there, a smirk playing on his lips, as he dragged it out. The break? I asked finally, knowing Derek wouldn't. I had to take a PS. About 2 miles north of here. Pulled off the highway, got out of the car, and guess what I smelled? Me, Derek said. The answer to our prayers. A cane. Liam shook his head. What did we do to get so lucky? The pack hates canes. Bunch of Neanderthals too stupid to keep out of trouble. If we hand them you, tell them you were the one snacking on humans. I felt Derek shift behind me. Thinking of leaving, pup? That would be rude. You bolt, we'll have to grab your girl, hold on to her until you decide to come back and hear me out. Derek went still, but I could feel his heart thumping against my back, hear his shallow breaths as he struggled to stay calm. My hand slid into my pocket, grasping my knife. Derek squeezed my shoulder, rubbing it again. It's okay, he whispered. It's okay. But his heart kept pounding, telling me it wasn't. Sure, Liam said. It'll be just fine. The pack aren't complete monsters. This poor orphaned kid just screwed up. He'll never do it again. They'll understand. He's probably got a. He glanced at Ramon. 50-50. Ramon considered it, then nodded. Liam turned back to us. 50-50 chance of surviving. And even if he doesn't, they'll make it quick. No chainsaws for you. Why are you telling us this? I asked. It was like the classic James Bond scene, where the villain explains what he'll do to Bond, giving him time to think up an escape plan. Which I really hoped Derek was doing. I might not be much help not when it came to plotting against werewolves, but I was really good at stalling. Good question, cutie. Why not just grab him, tie him up, toss him in our truck, and deliver him to the wolves up in Syracuse? Because the alpha isn't stupid. If we throw him a kid who's screaming he didn't do it, he might listen. See, there's only one way this can work. If your boyfriend comes along voluntarily and confesses. Derek snorted. Yeah. You don't like that plan. Derek shot him a look. Liam sighed. All right then. Option 2 it is. We kill you and have some fun with your girl. I'll do the killing, Ramon said. You can take the girl. She's a little young for me. Liam grinned. I like them young. His gaze traveled up and down me, his look making every hair on my body rise. Derek's hands vice gripped my shoulders. Leave her out of this, Derek rumbled. Never. Liam bared his teeth. I was almost hoping you'd say no. Sure, I'd love a scapegoat to feed the pack. But a little cutie like that, who already knows what I am. That's, he smiled. Sweet. He gave me a look that made me shrink back into Derek, my hand gripping the knife so hard it hurt. When Liam stepped forward again, Derek's arm shot around me, a growl vibrating up from his stomach. Liam put his hand out toward me. When Derek tensed, he pulled back, then did it again, testing his reaction, laughing when he got one, until even Ramon started to laugh. "Check this out," Liam said. "I think the pup's got himself a mate. Isn't that the cutest thing?" He leaned toward Derek, voice lowering. "It won't work out. It never does. Why don't you just give her to me now? Let me help you get over it. Painful, but quick. It's the best way." Derek moved me behind him. The werewolves let out a howl of laughter. "I think he's saying no," Ramon said. "Leave her out of this," Derek said. Liam shook his head. "How can I do that? Look at her. So tiny and cute, big blue eyes all wide and scared." He leaned around Derek to look at me. "That hair doesn't do anything for her. I can still smell the dye. What color is it really? Blonde, I bet. She looks like a blonde." His look made my insides twist. "If I go with you, she walks away," Derek said. "Right." "No," I whispered. "Course she does," Liam said. "Derek," I whispered. He put his hand behind him, gesturing for me to be quiet. It was a trick. He had a plan. He must have a plan. "Here's the deal," Derek said. "Deal?" Liam laughed. "This isn't up for negotiation, pup. It is if you want my cooperation. I'll go with you, but the first thing we do is get her on a bus. After I've seen her leave safely, I'm all yours." Liam rolled back on his heels. "Is your intelligence feeling a mite insulted, Ramon?" "Sure is." Ramon strolled up beside his friend. "You said you'd release her. And we will. Once you've done your part. Until then, she's our collateral to make sure you do. And don't worry, we'll take good care." Derek shot forward so fast it caught them both off guard. He grabbed Liam by the front of his shirt and whipped him into Ramon. The men went down. "Run," Derek said. I pulled out my knife. "Run." He gave me a shove that sent me flying. I started running, but slowly, my hand on the knife as I watched over my shoulder, getting far enough so Derek would think I was safe without abandoning him. Derek caught Ramon and whipped him against the steel fireman's pole, his head hitting with a twang. Liam lunged for Derek. He feinted out of the way. As Ramon lay motionless on the ground, Derek and Liam faced off, circling. Liam lunged again, and Derek twisted, but Liam caught the back of his sweatshirt, yanked him off his feet, and threw him. Derek hit the ground in a slide. Liam bore down on him, taking his time as Derek struggled to get up, wheezing and coughing, crawling along the ground. I veered to race back. Then Derek shot to his feet and broke into a run. 35. We zigzagged through a dark commercial district, with Liam at our heels the whole way. When we reached a townhouse complex, he fell back, like he didn't want to be seen chasing a couple of kids. He kept about 50 feet behind us, clearly planning to close the gap when we got to a more secluded place. On the far side of the complex was a strip mall. When we reached it, we looked back, and he was gone. We kept going, though, until we were another 2 blocks away, behind a closed bakery. I leaned against the cool brick wall, gasping for air. "You wanted tips on self-defense?" Derek said, breathing hard. I nodded. "The first lesson our dad taught us? If you're up against a better fighter, the first chance you get, surprise him with your secret move." He leaned down to my ear. "Run." A laugh bubbled up and my teeth stopped chattering. I took a deep breath and let myself relax against the wall. So he was as strong as you are? I asked. Whatever those scientists tweaked, it wasn't my strength. He might have been smaller than me, but he was just as strong, and he's got a lot more fighting experience. I was seriously outclassed. He wiped off gravel embedded in his chin. You aren't the only one who's going to need training. My dad taught me to use my strength to my advantage. Only that doesn't work fighting other werewolves. He rolled his shoulders, then pushed sweat-sodden hair out of his eyes. We'll catch our breath, but then we need to move. Once he figures out he lost us, he'll go back and pick up our trail. I'm good, I said, straightening. Anytime you want to go. Something moved above our heads. I looked up as Liam leaped from the rooftop. He landed on his feet right behind Derek. Your boy's not quite ready to leave, cutie. He has some business to finish first. Liam hit Derek with an uppercut that sent him reeling, blood spraying from his mouth. I fumbled for my knife, but it caught in the folds of my pocket. By the time I had it out, Derek had hit Liam back and now they were both on the ground, rolling, each trying to get a grip on the other. How many movie fight scenes had I seen? I'd even written a few. But being there, watching it, with someone I knew in serious danger, made those movie fights seem like they'd been filmed in slow motion. This was a whirlwind of fists and feet and grunts and gasps and blood. Mostly what I saw was the blood, flying, spattering, dripping, as I darted back and forth, knife in my hand. I thought of all the times I'd been in an audience, snarking about the stupid, useless girl hovering on the sidelines of a fight, holding a weapon but doing nothing, watching the guy get pummeled. I knew I had to help Derek. I knew he was in trouble, that most of that blood and those gasps and grunts were his. I wasn't afraid to use the knife. I wanted to use it. But there wasn't a chance. The fists flew and the bodies flew and the kicks flew, and every time I thought I had an opening, I'd dash forward only to find Derek in my path, not Liam, and I'd pull up fast before stabbing him. Then Liam got Derek on his knees, in a headlock, his free hand in Derek's hair. He yanked Derek's head back, and I saw the girl at the truck stop, her throat slashed, and I didn't stop to think whether I could do it. I ran at Liam and I drove the knife into the back of his thigh, ramming it into the hilt. Liam let out a howl and backhanded me. I sailed into the air, knife still clutched in my hand. I heard Derek shout my name as I hit the wall. My head cracked back against the brick. The floodlights overhead exploded into shards of light. Derek grabbed me before I hit the ground. I am fine, I said, pushing him away. I got my footing, wobbled, and found it again. I'm fine, I said, stronger now. I looked around. My knife had fallen beside me. I scooped it up. Liam lay behind Derek, writhing on the ground, snarling as he tried to stanch the blood. We took off. This time no one was chasing us, but it didn't matter. We kept running, knowing Liam would come after us the moment he was able. We need to get you to a bathroom, Derek said as we rounded a building. Me? We need to get you to a bathroom. I closed my mouth. Derek was obviously in shock and he did need a bathroom, to clean up and check the damage. He's going to follow our trail, I said. We have to trick him. I know. I'm thinking. I was, too, recalling every fugitive movie I'd ever seen where someone evaded tracking dogs. I slowed when I saw a huge puddle from the rain and a trash-clogged gutter. The water stretched at least 10 feet across. Then, I had a better idea. Climb on the curb and walk along the edge, I said. What? Just do it. We jogged along the curb until I saw a door to a small apartment building. I led Derek over and pulled on the knob. It was locked. Can you break it? I asked. He wiped off his hands, then grabbed the knob. I tried to get a better look at him to see how badly he'd been beaten, but it was too dark, and I could see only smears of blood everywhere on his face, his hands, his sweatshirt. He yanked the door open. We went inside, circled around a bit, then came back out. Now we'll follow the path we came on, I said. Along the top of the curb. Backtrack. When we reached the puddle, I stopped. We're going to cut through. Derek nodded. So he'll reach this, keep following our trail and think we're somewhere in that apartment, not realizing we doubled back on our tracks. Smart. Wading ankle deep through frigid water seemed to knock away the last of Derek's shock. Once we reached the other side, he took over and got us downwind so Liam couldn't smell us. Then he hustled me into a coffee shop. There were only a handful of people inside, all clustered at the counter, chatting with the server. No one even looked up as we made a beeline for the bathroom. Derek scooted me into the men's room and locked the door. He hoisted me onto the counter before I could protest, then scrubbed his hands well, sleeves pushed to his elbows, like he was preparing for surgery. Derek. He wet a paper towel, and took my chin, lifting and wiping my face. Derek? I'm not hurt. You're covered in blood. But it's not mine. Honest. It's from the werewolf. I know. He picked up my hand and started cleaning it. That's why I have to get it off. Derek. I leaned down, trying to see his face. Are you okay? He kept scrubbing. There are two ways to become a werewolf. Either you're born one or you get bitten by one. If you get the saliva in your bloodstream, it's like a virus. Blood, too. Dad says no, it's just saliva. But he could be wrong, and you've got cuts and scrapes and blood all over. I had a few cuts and scrapes, and I was only flecked with blood, but I kept my mouth shut and let him clean. As he did, I tried to check out how badly he was hurt. His scraped cheeks were pitted with gravel. His nose was bloodied. Broken? One eye was already darkening. Was that blood in the corner? His lip was cut and swollen. Were any teeth loose? Missing? Stop fidgeting, Chloe. I couldn't help it. His injuries obviously needed more attention than mine, but there was no sense saying anything until he was done. Finally, when he seemed to have scrubbed off every fleck of blood and a few layers of skin, I said, "Okay, now on to you. Take off your jacket and sweatshirt." Derek, I'm clean. Trust me, I've never been this clean. You've got blood on your cuffs. As I took off the jacket, the zipper snagged my necklace. It's caught, I began. Derek gave the jacket a tug, and the chain snapped, the pendant dropping. He swore and grabbed it before it hit the floor. On my necklace. He swore some more, then said, "I'm sorry." The girl in the alley grabbed it, I lied. The clasp was probably weak. No biggie. He looked down at the pendant in his hand. Wasn't this red before? I hadn't taken a good look at it for a couple of days. No mirrors, and the pendant had been under my shirt. I'd thought the color seemed different before, but it had changed even more now, almost blue. I think it's some kind of talisman," I said. "My mom gave it to me, to ward off bogeyman ghosts, I guess." "Hey!" He stared at it, then shook his head and handed it back. "Better keep it on you then." I stuffed it into my pocket, down at the bottom where it would be safe. Then I took off my sweatshirt and pushed up my sleeves. No blood had seeped through, but he still made me wash my forearms. Okay, now can we take care of the guy who was actually in the fight? There's a lot of blood. It seems to be mostly from your nose. It is. You got hit in the chest a few times. How are your ribs? Maybe bruised. Nothing critical. Shirt off. He sighed, like now I was the one fussing too much. If you want me to leave, so you can look after it yourself. Nah. He pulled off his sweatshirt and folded it on the counter. There wasn't any blood below his collar, where it had dripped from his nose and lip. I guess that's to be expected when you're fighting with fists, not weapons. He said his ribs on the right were sore to the touch, but, to be honest, I wouldn't know bruised from broken. He was breathing fine, and that was the main thing. Okay, your nose. Is it broken? Does it hurt? Even if it was broken, there's nothing you can do. Let me check your eyes. He grumbled, but didn't resist. The bloodshot corner was already clearing, and I couldn't see any cuts. He'd have a shiner, though. When I told him that, he just grunted. I wet a fresh paper towel. You have dirt in your cheek. Let me. No. He caught my hand before I could touch his face. He took the cloth and leaned over the counter to wipe the dirt out himself. I tried not to wince as I watched. The gravel had gouged his cheek badly. You're going to need to get that checked out. Yet. He looked at himself in the mirror, his expression unreadable, until he noticed me watching, then turned away and stepped back from the mirror. I handed him another wet paper towel and he cleaned his neck and collar, freckled with dried blood. Still got that deodorant? He asked. I retrieved it from my jacket pocket and set it on the counter. He kept washing. In the playground, I said, when you were negotiating, you weren't serious, right? About going with them? It was a trick. Silence stretched for way too long. Derek. He didn't look up, just reached over and got a fresh towel, his gaze averted. Did you hear anything they said? I asked. About what? His gaze still on the towel, he folded it carefully before throwing it into the trash. Hunting humans for sport? Eating them? The bitterness in his voice cut through me. Yeah, I caught that part. That doesn't have anything to do with you. He lifted his eyes, gaze shuddered. No. Not unless being a werewolf transforms you into a wolf and a redneck moron. He shrugged and ripped off more paper towels. Do you want to hunt humans, Derek? No. Do you think about it? No. How about eating them? Do you think about that? He shot me a look of disgust. Of course not. Do you even dream about killing people? He shook his head. Just deer, rabbits. When I frowned, he went on. For the last few years I've been dreaming of being a wolf. Running in the forest. Hunting deer and rabbits. Right. Like a wolf, not a man-eating monster. He wet the paper towel. So why would you ever let these guys take you to? I stopped. The pack. Is that what you wanted? Tell them you'll go, and after they release me, tell the pack the truth and use that as an introduction? Meet them? Be with your own kind? No. That doesn't matter to me. Dad says it does to other werewolves. It mattered to the other boys. They hated anyone who wasn't one of us. Me? I don't care. The only reason I'd want to meet a werewolf would be the same reason you'd want to meet a necromancer. To talk, get tips, training, whatever. Preferably from one who doesn't think hunting humans makes good sport. Like this pack. They kill man-eaters and they don't seem that thrilled about man-hunters. Is that what you thought? You could go to them and they'd help you? When I asked if you were listening to those two goons, that's the part I meant about the pack. What they'd do to you? Killing werewolves with chainsaws and stuff. Derek snorted. You don't believe it, then? I relaxed, nodding. No one would do that. Cut someone up with a chainsaw and pass around photos? Those guys were just trying to scare you. No, I'm sure there are photos. And I'm sure those guys believe the pack carved up someone. But the photos must be fakes. You can do that kind of stuff with special effects and makeup, can't you? Sure, but why? For the same reason you just said. To scare people. Liam and Ramon think the pack really did it, so they steer clear of its territory. Doesn't seem like a bad idea to me. But would you ever think of it yourself? That look of disgust returned. Of course not. But you considered entrusting your life to people who would? Werewolves who play judge and jury for their own kind? Torture and kill other werewolves? Knowing that, you'd go to them, pretend you killed humans, and hope they'd go easy on you because you're a kid? Or were those odds okay with you? If they decided you didn't deserve to live, maybe they'd be right. I meant it as sarcasm. But when his answer was slow, coming much too slow, my heart hammered. Derek. He trashed the wet paper towel. No, I don't have a death wish, okay? You'd better not. I don't, Chloe, he said softly. I mean it. I don't. Our eyes locked and the panic buzzing in my head turned to something else, my heart still hammering, my throat going dry. I looked away and mumbled, good. He backed up. We gotta go. I nodded and slid off the counter. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.